Well, good morning. This is Ian R. Crane, and it is the morning of Tuesday, 6th February 2018. And a few people will be aware of this, in fact, quite possibly none. But today is the 1882nd day that we have been frack free in the UK, since the Secretary of State for the then Department of Energy and Climate Change, Ed Davey, lifted the moratorium that had been put in place on unconventional gas exploitation, i.e. fracking, in the UK. He lifted it on Friday the 13th of December. I wonder why he chose that day. Friday the 13th of December 2012. And since then, it really has been a wonderful battle in so many respects to keep this country frack free. It has drawn people together in this country like nothing before. The anti-fracking community crosses right across the social and the political and the philosophical spectrum. And as I have alluded to on many occasions, you know, within the anti-fracking community, they may not agree on much else. In fact, in some cases, maybe nothing else. But they agree on the fact that unconventional gas exploitation, high pressure, high volume, hydraulic fracturing has absolutely no place in this country. And that's not based on just a random belief. It's based on their research. And these people have looked at what damage and devastation unconventional gas exploitation has caused wherever it has been established anywhere else in the world. There isn't a single location that has got off scot-free. And recently in southern Queensland, and of course this is an area very close to my heart, thanks to the wonderful hospitality of the people of southern Queensland, in late 2014, when I went into the gas fields and spent some time with the Monk family and with the Jenkins and a number of other people who unfortunately I can't name due to the confidentiality agreements that they had signed in return for taking money from the gas companies. But all of those people I spoke to regretted that decision on the basis that they realised that their silence had been purchased. And now, you know, we are hearing from doctors in Queensland that there is a considerable increase on the healthcare services and the hospitals in southern Queensland as a result of illnesses that are being attributed to the presence of some 20,000 plus gas wells across southern Queensland in an area about the size of the UK. And this is what the anti-fracking community in this country has been looking at. And yet, for some reason, we seem to have a bunch of Tory politicians, with one or two exceptions. But the bulk of these Tory politicians are the archetypal whores to the corporations. And of course, Kevin Hollinsnake, the MP for North Yorkshire, who was parachuted in to replace his predecessor, Anne McIntosh, who was told that she would be deselected and she could either go quietly and get elevated into the Lords, or there'd be a bit of a fight. But she was going one way or another, and Kevin Hollinsnake was parachuted in to effectively be the PR representative for Barclays Bank, trading as Third Energy. And it is wonderful that some of these Tory politicians are becoming increasingly vocal in their opposition. But sadly, of course, that may be somewhat limiting for their career, as Ed Davey found out, because although he lifted the moratorium in 2012, he subsequently was the victim of the wrath of Lord John Brown, because once Ed Davey discovered that Quadrilla had deliberately withheld information about the damage to their well at Priest Hall, which triggered the seismic events, which reportedly caused damage to some 80 properties in the area. But Quadrilla deliberately withheld that information at the time, and Lord John Brown, who was the chairman of Quadrilla at the time, was somewhat upset that Ed Davey should have the audacity to challenge him and Quadrilla on their integrity for not reporting the damage that they knew had been caused. Well, Lord John Brown, unfortunately, of course, had the ear of David Cameron, and Ed Davey was unceremoniously dumped out of his role of Secretary of State. Well, roll the clock forward, and of course the Department of Energy and Climate Change no longer exists. This has been replaced by the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And of course the current incumbent is Greg Clark. And sadly, word is reaching us from inside Westminster that Greg Clark is under enormous pressure to sign off on the Barclays Bank, trading as Third Energy, application to frack at Kirby Misperton. And as we've seen from some of the aerial shots that were obtained of the well site yesterday, it certainly seems that Third Energy have employed some professional banksmen now to tidy up the site, and it would seem that this is in preparation for some kind of inspection which is anticipated to occur sometime, anytime really now. And the reason that the pressure is on is because Third Energy will not want to delay any longer, because they will run the risk then of impacting on the tourist season. Now, Easter comes quite early this year. I think it's the first weekend of April, and the schools break up, of course, just before that. And that is when Flamingo Land opens the gates and welcomes the massive influx of tourists at the start of the spring and summer season. And that's why, last year we knew that basically if we got to the end of March, then there was no possibility of Third Energy rolling any trucks onto the site until September. And of course it was around about September 24th, I think it was, that Quadrilla started bringing in the infrastructure in preparation to frack the well at Kirby Misperton. What they didn't take into account, of course, was the fact that they were going to be under increasing scrutiny, not just in terms of their competence, but also in terms of their finances. So here we are, and tomorrow will be the 13th week. It will be the end of the 13th week that Third Energy, did I say Quadrilla just now? Third Energy have been desperately waiting on Greg Clark's approval to frack at Kirby Misperton. So, with now, what is it, 8 weeks to go until the start of the tourist season in North Yorkshire, the pressure is being put on Greg Clark. Now, Greg Clark, I believe, knows what he really should do. He has an enormous responsibility. We know he didn't want to be in the job by now. He was desperately hoping that he was going to be plucked out in the early year reshuffle. But unfortunately, of course, Jeremy Hunt is so determined to destroy the NHS that he dug his heels in and said he needed to finish that job before he would agree to being moved out of his current position, which left Greg Clark with a bit of a problem. It left him in the chair. It left him with the responsibility. And I believe that he really does know what needs to be done. But he's under enormous political pressure. And this is now the acid test. Will Greg Clark become the archetypal whore to the corporations and sign it off, under duress maybe, but nonetheless sign it off? Or will he do the right thing by the people of this country? Will he do the right thing by the people that have elected him? Now, the people who elected him in Tunbridge Wells probably have very, very little idea of what's really going on. But it's not too far away to get to Leith Hill. And anyone watching this from the area around Tunbridge Wells or within the wider confines of Greg Clark's constituency, take a trip to Leith Hill, to Horse Hill. Go and talk to the people at Balcombe and see what your MP is potentially about to unleash right across the entire north of England. The area where your MP originates from, because he's a Teesside boy. And in fact, I was contacted by somebody just a couple of days ago who said they went to school with Greg Clark. And they said he was always ambitious. He was very smart, but always ambitious. And they're not surprised that he's in the position that he's in. But they said, when I said, well, do you think he's going to sign this off? And they said, I have no idea. They said, you know, I have no idea of the sort of pressures that are being brought to bear upon him right now. And, you know, I guess that if he does sign this off, then Tunbridge Wells, as the constituency, will benefit in some way from some increased funding, like Tunbridge Wells needs it. You know, one of the wealthiest boroughs in the entire southeast of England. So, Greg, do the right thing. You will go down in history one way or the other here. You're either going to go down in history as the man who condemned the north of England to the devastation that will manifest if this industry becomes established, or you will go down in history as the man who did the right thing and went against the party whip, went against the pressure of the corporations and refused to sign off, particularly on a company that neither has the competence or the financial resilience to do what it is asking you to sign off on. So, you know, and you must by now be getting the flavour of the zeitgeist around the country. Because yesterday, of course, Derbyshire County Council, and now let's make the observation that Derbyshire County Council is a Tory-controlled council. And the local MP is a Tory MP by the name of Lee Rowley. Now, Lee Rowley is a recent addition to Parliament, and he replaced the previous incumbent, who was a lady by the name of Natasha Engels, and she was pro-fracking. And so she was campaigning as a Labour MP and refusing to denounce INEOS. And so fortunately, the electorate saw through her, bounced her out, and replaced her with a Tory who is vehemently anti-fracking. And funnily enough, Natasha Engels is now on the INEOS payroll. So, you know, proving the point that politicians are generally whores to the corporations, either when they're in office or immediately afterwards, especially if they've done the right thing. But Lee Rowley yesterday, following Derbyshire County Council's Planning Committee's decision to oppose INEOS at the forthcoming public inquiry by 9-1. 9 votes to 1 on a Tory-controlled planning committee against INEOS's application to frack at Marsh Lane. And Lee Rowley tweeted this yesterday. He said, "Delighted that the planning committee have chosen to reject the Bramley Moor Lane proposal by 9 votes to 1. Congratulations to everyone who worked so hard on this. One step more on the way to stopping fracking at Marsh Lane." Well, hopefully it was one step more on the way to stopping fracking anywhere in the UK. And of course, the industry has got a serious bloody nose over the past few weeks. And, you know, it was January 24th, I think, and when Lancashire County Council unanimously rejected Quadrilla's traffic management plan proposals to go back to, to start operations at Rossiter in parallel with their operations at Preston New Road, which, of course, aren't going too well, are they? Then, literally, the following day, Rotherham Metropolitan Borough Council voted unanimously to oppose INEOS's application to frack at Hart Hill. And this, of course, is also going to be appealed and will end up ultimately at a public inquiry. But it's extremely important that the council have voted unanimously here to oppose it. And then on the same day, in Cheshire, the Cheshire West and Cheshire Chester Council voted 9-1 against iGas returning to Ellesmere Port. So yesterday's decision is 4-0 to the anti-fracking community. Now, you know, the Tories are basically going to be saying, well, it might be 4-0, but we've still got Greg Clark in our pocket, and he's going to sign off on Barclays Bank's application to frack at Kirby Misperton. Well, I wouldn't be so sure, because the people who have contacted me, who have had some contact with Greg Clark, have all suggested that he is a man of principle, and that he really does want to do the right thing. So until there is a wet signature on that document, and it's no good Greg Clark saying, well, you know, I passed my recommendations to the Oil and Gas Authority, and Dr. Andy Samuel actually took the final decision. No, he didn't, Greg Clark. It's your decision, and your decision alone. You are the sole shareholder of the private limited company operating as the Oil and Gas Authority. So it's on your shoulders. And are you going to prove the people who think they know you correct as a principled man and reject this application? Or are you going to prostitute yourself to the corporations and attempt to justify why you have signed off on this application? Because one way or another, it doesn't matter whether or not Barclays Bank, Trading and Third Energy get away with it at Kirby Misperton. If this triggers, as it is intended to, the unconventional gas exploitation right across the whole of the north of England, it is only a matter of time before the problems manifest. Let's not forget that it was 2 years in southern Queensland before the problems started to manifest with the boreholes initially, and the contamination of the water that was being used in the area for agricultural purposes, and then the health issues started to manifest shortly after that. And that has happened everywhere else in the world where this industry has kicked off. So don't think for 1 minute that there is any possibility that it's going to be different in the UK. And you know, we've heard this robust regulatory control parroted so often, it's really pathetic. If that's the best you've got, then you know, the people that have done the research know fine well that that same rhetoric has been trotted out right across the areas of the world that have been fracked thus far. So there's two important meetings today. One is the first meeting to look at the whole background of INEOS, to look at their appalling track record when it comes to health and safety and environmental concerns, and of course not to mention their cavalier attitude towards their employees and the way in which they brag about the way in which they destroyed the trade unions within Grangemouth just 5 years ago. And that meeting is at Strensall at the Village Hall. That's just north of York, and that meeting will start at around 6:45. So this is the first of a series of meetings in the North Yorkshire area, and I would encourage you to go along to one of these meetings. And if you're anywhere near, or in York or north of York, then go along to the Strensall meeting tonight. Let's make sure that Andy Georgiou of Food and Water Watch gets a packed house. And across the other side of the country, at Formby, or just outside Formby, there is a meeting there to discuss the proposals being put forward by Aurora, who want to start drilling an exploratory well just outside the town of Formby. And of course, these are opposite sides of the country, but if you look at what's licensed, then basically the intention, of course, is to frack right across from the Cheshire, Lancashire coastline, right across to the Yorkshire coastline. And you know, this is the devastation of the not so desolate north. So it's day 1882 that we've woken up to a frack-free morning. And the pressure really is on Greg Clark right now. But, you know, if we get beyond this, if Greg Clark does the right thing, then there's a very good chance that the UK will remain frack-free for some considerable time to come, maybe forever. Unfortunately, if he does succumb and he does sign off on it, then, of course, we need that frack to be witnessed by an enormous number of people. And then, obviously, we will be encouraging people to come to Kirkby Misperton and show solidarity with the people in that particular sacrifice zone. So, as is always the case, please encourage people to do their own research. We know that when people look at this for themselves, it doesn't take them long to realise that not only is this something that should never be established in this country or anywhere else in the world, come to that, but they will realise the magnitude to which their politicians, and particularly, of course, the Tory politicians, can lie so easily. And if they're lying on this, ask yourself the question, what else are they lying about? What else are they not telling you? Why is it that the country has levels of poverty that probably haven't been seen since the early part of the 20th century? There's something not right about this country right now, and anyone that's relying on the politicians to put it right is living in la-la land. It's absolutely essential that the people of this country get involved and start to put the necessary pressure on to bring about the changes that we all know we need to see. And if the politicians won't drive it, then we need to drive it. So thanks for joining me today, and I will be back tomorrow morning for what will be, hopefully, I'm sure it will be, day 1883 frack-free since the moratorium was lifted on Friday the 13th of December 2012. You have a great day, and let's keep the pressure on. Catch you tomorrow.